So I picked up We Live Here Now by Sarah Pinborough, sight unseen, as part of the Women in Horror Book Club reads. I assumed it would be a haunted house horror, and while I was correct, it's probably one of the most unique haunted houses I've read ever. And as someone who likes novel concepts, I made it something I instantly fell in love with. And I really wanted to discuss it with y'all in some more detail. So obviously the format here is going to be one of our Gothic reviews. There are 9 elements we explore on this channel that could make something Gothic, and you only need 3 to qualify. This is a full spoiler review, and while I enjoyed not knowing what was going on and like sort of slowly finding it out with the reveal, this is also a book that's so well written. Even if you know the reveal ahead of time, I think there are a lot of things that you can just appreciate artistry and craftsmanship wise. In fact, there is part of me that really wants to read it again now that I know where we're going, to see all the little tells and hints and clues that I could have understood but didn't have quite enough information to put together correctly. Starting us off with elements of horror. A lot of them are more grounded than what I tend to expect in a Gothic work. For our example, one of our main characters, Emily, has just come out of a 2 or 3 month long coma, and she is still suffering mental and physical effects from what put her in the coma. And on top of that, she is moving into this big old house out in the country far away from London. So she's in unfamiliar surroundings, and the house is like run down and potentially dangerous for her and requires like more mobility than she really has. All of that on its face, the relative isolation if something does go wrong, the higher probability something will go wrong, her unfamiliarity, and the fact that like she could start hallucinating, smelling things, experiencing stuff, losing memory as a result of the coma. She might interpret that as supernatural, but it might actually just be like her body shutting down or failing or having a lasting impact. Is scary in and of itself. And then on top of that, Emily's husband, Freddie, is acting really strangely. Like something is off about him, both from how Emily perceives him, but then we also get like some perspectives directly from Freddie, and he's being like evasive and irrational and angry, and you start to like be really afraid that he is going to do something terrible to Emily, or that he already has done something awful, and it's going to be like revealed that he's the one who pushed her off the cliff, or that he's the one who's really been unfaithful for a long time. I mean, as we come to find out, it's that Freddie has a gambling addiction and he relapsed while Emily was in the hospital in the coma, and he owes a ton of money, which is not great, but at the same time is also like definitely not the worst of all these things it could have been. I don't know, maybe it actually is because they have no way to get this money. I've been really lucky in my life that I haven't had to deal with someone who's had any kind of gambling addiction, so like I'm a lot more removed from it, and I think generally that it's better than a lot of other things it could be, but as I don't have that experience, I am willing to be proven very wrong on that. And then of course there's also like general anxiety because Emily and Freddie have moved to a very small town where they need to meet a bunch of new people and make a good impression, and the small town is like very like interconnected and everybody is very gossipy, so like you tell one person one thing or say something just slightly wrong and you've kind of like messed up without even knowing. So then we like sort of start diving into the supernatural horror where Emily starts experiencing weird things in the home and Freddie keeps denying it. Enough of what's going on in the home is ambiguous that you kind of like, it's up in the air for a while, and then it starts to feel definitely supernatural, but maybe ominous, maybe not. Like I think the threat of Freddie is so large and looming over Emily for so long that it takes a while to realize how dangerous the house actually is. And it's hard to like take what the house is doing as a warning or as it wanting Emily to do something or as a threat. Like for example, it drops all these books down off the shelf and the first word from each of the titles spells out "you will die here," which could be a warning, could be a threat. As we come to find out, and here's the big surprise haunted house twist, I think it was actually just a way to grab Emily's attention and make her pay attention to the haunting, because what's haunting here is not an actual dead person, it is a piece of someone who's still alive. Because what happens in the house is you can murder someone in it, and if you lay the body in the 3rd floor master bedroom, the person revives as like only the good parts and no memory of them being murdered, and then you guys go live someplace else happily ever after. The bad part remains trapped in the house, and it's the bad part of this woman, Sally, who wants to be reunited with her body, wants to escape the house that keeps like threatening Emily, raising and lowering the nail that like got her killed, and that scares Emily because it could cause like an infection on her already weakened body. Like, she's making all these rattling, threatening bumps and grunts in the house. She's changing the whole atmosphere from like welcoming to cold and scary. She's like writing her name on glass windows and stuff. So eventually Emily figures the whole thing out, and she does get what she needs to free Sally, and Sally like becomes whole again, which is when Sally drops some lore on us that the house itself traps the bad parts and slowly absorbs or eats them if you stay there too long, which raises a whole bunch of questions about what happens to spirits in the afterlife and whether or not getting killed and revived within this house will lead to you not having an afterlife. And Sally also goes on to say that being on the land proper, the house like draws out the worst parts of yourself and makes you extra mean and uncharitable to your partner, and like builds this aggression because it wants you to either be killed or kill your significant other within the house so that it can trap the bad parts for you and eat their spirit. And I guess you can go on your way happy with a better partner. I don't know, that's just how it's explained in the book. And obviously now that all that has been presented to us, it wouldn't really be a full narrative if this didn't happen to Emily herself. Emily is now like trapped as the good version of herself, and Freddie is super happy about it or whatever, and Emily like doesn't remember a bunch of stuff leading up to her murder. I guess because all of that would have shaken the good one of her out of her goodness. But Sally sends her a letter that reminds her of everything that happened, and we as readers presume that means that Emily is going to go ahead and take steps to free herself. But actually the good version of Emily likes herself as she is, likes being rid of the bad parts, and is going to leave that aspect of her to be eaten by the house. In fact, the good version of Emily is able to poison and murder her husband so that he will also only have the good parts in him, which really calls into question what are the good parts of a person, whether or not that's that person at all. You would imagine an all good person would be incapable of killing somebody, and even though Freddie's gonna resurrect or whatever, she is leaving part of Freddie to suffer and wither away, slowly eaten and die. Not to mention she's leaving part of her own self to that fate. You would assume a good person couldn't do that. And because this is what the house considers good, it calls a lot of things in the narrative into question. Does the house actually draw people to it, or is this all circumstantial and then we're blaming the house for things that are actually on that person? Does this house actually make you the worst version of yourself, or is this who you always were, who you always would have been, and how you always would have acted, and the house is just taking advantage of that? Is any part of you left in the good version, or is that just like something the house creates as like a puppet and the house has all of you wrapped up in? I don't know, I think the further down the well we go, the more aspects of like this good bad version split that we get to experience, the more questions that arise about what's really going on, what does this mean, how much is it supernatural, and how much of it is just who this person is. Rolling me into character is king. Since this house seems to only call to couples that are in crisis, Emily and Freddie are like a perfect group to go on this journey with. I think we get first person or limited third person reads, one from Emily's perspective and the other from Freddie's perspective. So we really get to know them, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, where they are at any given moment. And it's done very artfully because when they're at the house, emotions do seem to be amplified, and they do seem to be kinder and more charitable when they're farther away from the house. Leave the reader with the idea that these people are a lot better than they are acting or being portrayed within the house's confines. That's a pretty complicated thing to do with characters that we only know in context of living with this house. So in and of itself, that it creates that uncertainty, that it creates that impression for the reader potentially, I think is done really well, shows great characterization and a lot of work on this author's point. The horror here is also like very tied to the personal. One reoccurring theme, marriage and couples and whether you should stay together or break up. Whether like Freddie and Emily are the lasting kind or the breakup kind, a thing that we keep reoccurring and re-hitting over and over again. And of course there's like some more insidious nature to it because like Freddie is considering murdering Emily for the insurance money. But Emily is also considering leaving Freddie, or considering like that she's stuck being dependent on him now because of the coma and she should have got out before now. You know, there's the question of whether or not they've changed or whether or not they've just recognized that each of them has aspects within themselves they've always had that are intolerable to them. I like the way they do this because it's like a yin and yang, where like the very thing that attracted them in is now the thing they most despise. And I do generally believe that like your best quality and your strongest trait is also your biggest negative or downside. So it's interesting the way that it's utilized here in a way that continues to create disgust and resentment instead of like an ability to still enjoy what you originally found charming. I find these two characters a very compelling choice too, because there's a lot of like self-denial going on here. They don't seem to know themselves, their own desires, their wants or impulses very well. And because of that, even though we're getting this very close narrative style, there's an aspect of them that's very unknowable. They are acting so extremely when they're in the house, and they seem to be acting differently when they're outside of the house. There is a question of like a public life versus a private life, if that's what's going on, or if this is an aspect of a house influence versus outside of the pall of the home. There's a question of whether or not they just act intensely like this in the moment, and then when they come off of that emotional high, they realize that they've like done fucked up and they need to apologize. Like, there are a lot of possibilities, and balance there is really expertly woven. Rolling us into more poetic prose, there is a third perspective in here besides Emily and Freddie, and it's that of a crow. I really hated this perspective for a really long time, but it does circle in and make sense that we're getting it. I do find giving an animal perspective to be an experimental stylistic choice, so it does get the point for more poetic prose, even though I didn't generally appreciate it. I don't know that I found anything else in here like particularly evocative or poetic outside of that stylistic element, but it doesn't matter because incorporating the crow repetitively into the story, giving them like a perspective and a viewpoint, and trying to like make it slightly non-human for us so that it really feels like we're actually listening to a crow's perspective, in and of itself gives you the point. Rolling me into number 4, elements of loneliness and longing. I do think this story tries and plays on various levels and aspects of isolation in modern life. The couple does go from being connected to their friends and immediate like co-workers and stuff in London to being isolated out here. I think it's like, what, a 2-hour drive away from London? Sort of like upheaving everything about their life and taking them away from their usual points of contact who could help support them. It also creates separation from Emily and her doctor, Emily and therapist, anyone she could reach out to for mental or physical help. The town itself, while friendly, also is very like gossipy and insular, and they're kind of like outsiders introducing themselves to the town. So there's like some obligations for them to make a good impression, for them to do the outreach. They're not really able to rely on these people or reach out to them for help. And in particular, Freddie does a great job sort of like undermining Emily's credibility by saying that she's crazy and that she's struggling a lot, and pointing out some erratic behavior on Emily's part, which she is showing to an outsider when you lack context for all the things Emily's experiencing that's driving her to search for what's going on in her own home and what's going on in her marriage. It was an interesting way to try and give us that Gothic level of isolation while still keeping us connected to a local community, making modern conveniences like the phone and the internet play in. And like, I think it was trying to explore how some versions of technology, how some aspects of small town community life actually further isolate us. It was like giving, you can be surrounded and have a million different ways to reach out and still be all alone. Because Emily does have to keep reaching out, meeting new people, doing various levels of research, we needed this connective bit, and I think it keeps connecting her back out and connecting her in ways that make this feel not like the right Gothic loneliness and longing. I do believe it could be done in a modern era, even with phones and internet and people you could talk to. And I think this story tries to, but I just think the way we tell the narrative is such that we need more connectivity than is traditionally allowed in a Gothic tale. Rolling me into elements of human mortality. You kill people in the house and they get resurrected if they're there in the 3rd floor master bedroom. Obviously, we're tackling what it means to to be dead or alive. I do feel like it's a super unique twist on how to explore that. Like, for example, if you lived in this house, would you just be immortal? If you died of old age, as long as it was in that third floor bedroom, would you perpetually resurrect? But it's also very interesting when we're exploring the people who are involved with the home, because you can have just the good parts of your partner if you're willing to kill them. The house will resurrect them into a better version of themselves. But you have to be the kind of person who's able to kill another person to reap these benefits. And I think de facto that means a lot of people can't make use of the house or really explore the human mortality of it all. As it is, I think even the house and the author recognize this, because a lot of the deaths in the home that lead to resurrections are accidental. But given that, like, in some way, shape, or form, you are defeating death because you murdered the person and they come back to life, it does make me wonder about what comes back and what is left behind. I touched on it briefly in the horror elements, but the better Emily does not seem to resemble Emily as we've known her at all. Because the original Emily had finally come to a conclusion that she needed to leave the house and that she was going to leave this house with Freddie. They were going to use the money that she'd procured via blackmail to start a bed and breakfast the two of them have always wanted to do in France. Which, like, excluding how they got the money to do it, that's sort of a cute dream that the two of them share. Like, we get to hear Freddie thinking about the bed and breakfast one day too. So the bad version of Emily, even though she struggled with this choice, even though the house was exerting influence on her to leave him in some way, shape, or form, she had triumphed over all of that and was going to stay with Freddie, thought their relationship was worth saving, and thought a nuclear family with him was what she valued. And the good version of Emily also does decide she wants to stay with Freddie, but she decides she only wants to stay with the good version of Freddie. She is not willing to take Freddie on warts and all the way the bad version of Emily was. Not to mention, the good version of Emily murders Freddie, which is not a thing the full version of Emily could have ever managed. Or at least it doesn't appear like it, since the house was exerting significant pressure on her to come to that conclusion and she still doesn't try to kill him. I'm not saying the original version of Emily is perfect. She did the blackmail, she had an infidelity, like, she kept a lot of things from Freddie, but at the end of the day, she had decided to stay with him, she had decided to reveal that information to him, and she decided the two of them were worth a fresh start together. We also have to question the better version of Sally. We're not as close to her as readers because we don't get a lot of her perspective or intuition or thoughts, but the fact that the better version of Sally has an open marriage with her husband seems like not something the original version would ever do. The drastic change like that says that you're not the same person anymore. And I'm not positive that Sally's extreme jealousy over her boyfriend is a bad thing. I know her boyfriend perceived it as bad because he wanted to fool around with other women without consequence, and her jealousy of people that he wasn't having an affair with, and like her suspicion of that, is not good. A bridge too far, but asking your partner not to fool around with other people is like the par for the course in today's day and age. They probably need to break up if that's not something he was down for, but it's not something that he should kill her and get like a good version that allows him to do whatever he wants whenever he wants. I'd argue there's no version of Sally that's actually Sally that would be cool like that. So that makes me think that maybe when the house resurrects the people, it's just like something the house is animating for you, and it's the whole of the person that's trapped there, and it's like slowly eating their souls. I do feel that the story overall was sort of downplaying the death of the body through this like death resurrection aspect, but in doing that, further exploring what it means for a soul to die, or a soul to be consumed or obliterated or absorbed in some way, shape, or form. And if we are all gonna die eventually, better to do it outside of this house so that you don't accidentally get eaten by whatever lives here. Rolling us into the supernatural element, people who die in the house don't stay dead, they get resurrected somehow. And the spirits that get left behind within the house are able to interact with the house and do unexplainable things. The story is like basically a reverse Pet Sematary. You kill these people in the right place and you resurrect them, and then sometimes dead is better. And we also get a peek about what it's like on the other side for these dead spirits that are trapped, which was kind of eye-opening to me because the level of animosity and rage and anger Emily and Freddie have for each other is a lot. If like The worst version of themselves while they were alive in the house was malevolent and bad and a little evil, then this is like full-on hatred evil. And I guess I understand why Emily feels that way, because she was murdered by Freddy, even though it seems like Freddy was kind of possessed by the house into doing that. Freddy should not be as angry with Emily because it was the good version of Emily that killed him, not the version he's trapped with here. Although Freddy had already built up so much resentment and hatred for Emily before his bad version was trapped here, perhaps that's what we're seeing manifest. I do also kind of wonder what Emily brought back when she freed Sally. Like, Sally ends up killing her husband as a form of revenge for what he did to her. And I wonder if her original self would have ever done that before her stay in the house. Because Sally's death is very accidental and Roger is very upset about it. On the other side though, it does seem like Sally still has kindness and empathy. She thanks Emily for freeing her and is the one who sends her a letter that lets good Emily know what's going on and allows her to make a decision about what to do next. And good Emily would have never had the knowledge base to decide to kill Freddy or to decide to free herself from the house. And we also have like that fun extra bit where like in Pet Sematary, the reason the ground can resurrect people is like an ancient knowledge the Native Americans had about the land itself. And here this home was built on a crossroads, so it's sort of like echoing that ancient knowledge, maybe an ancient spirit that was here, or like a historic use that has led to this. Hi. You're barely in frame. You're gonna look real funny on this. Questioning a character's mental health and mental reality. It's very light here. Freddy does make use of some of Emily's erratic behavior and predisposition to having some mental instability after her coma to imply that she's mentally unwell. This is certainly something her doctor and the vicar is concerned about, and he sort of plants it in several coworkers' minds in case he's able to like fake Emily's suicide and get insurance money. Emily herself also questions her mental health and mental reality very lightly early on, but she is a character that's very confident and sure of herself, so she decides that like what she's experiencing doesn't fit the coma symptoms and moves on very quickly despite the fact other people keep telling her she cray-cray. I wouldn't personally give it the Gothic point, even though it does play with those themes a little bit. Rolling us into making use of local folklore, superstition, and legend. I do think the fact that the house is set on the crossroads starts us off wondering if this is something inherent living in the land that kind of like created this scenario, or if using the land as a crossroads ended up building this malevolent, hungry force. The fact that we do find a whole lore book in a hidden compartment within the house and a doctor who's doing experiments to like confirm something a patient told them before they were killed is all pretty interesting, pretty like traditional lore, superstition kind of thing. It's a really fun aspect of the book that I enjoyed a lot, and I think this book makes great use of like urban legend and gossip as well, because like the town is very gossipy, secret keepery kind of situation where like everybody kind of knows everyone's business. They know the history of this house, they know like everybody who's ever lived in it. They're like slow to reveal different aspects, which makes Emily jump to various conclusions throughout the narrative and makes us think we know what's going on way before I at least actually understood what was happening in this book. And I think it does a great job like creating these conflicting ghost stories, narratives, and possibility to keep us sort of like wondering and intrigued and engaged and kind of like solving the mystery of what's going on in the house, which rolls me into strong sense of place. The layout of the house is very important in this one, and I had like a great mental picture of the interior of the home. I even had like a decent picture of the exterior and what was going on out there. There's a bunch of traditional ghost scares. There's like that nail that keeps appearing and disappearing, cutting people at various inconvenient times and actually killing Sally during a fight. There's the fact that like dying within the house and being placed in the third floor bedroom resurrects you. There's all these bumps and groans. There's the books that keep falling down, telling Emily over and over again that she will die here. There's the fogged up mirror that spells a name. There's a classic Ouija board scene that kind of kicks us off. It's doing all of those classic Gothic haunted house things very well. And for me, what really takes it above and beyond another level is the twist twist of how the house is haunted or what's going on in the house. Which is a thing revealed to us when we find a secret room in the house with a hidden journal book that gives us the lore dump. I mean, I love all of these classic Gothic haunting elements. It definitely gets the point here, and the fact that it subverts expectations and twists it into something new makes it even more fun to read. I would definitely say, since the house is actually like capturing these spirits and feeding on them, it has its own life and will of its own. It might even be drawing people who are troubled into the home so that it can take best advantage of already weakened individuals. Wrapping it all up, We Live Here Now has 7 of the 9 Gothic points. This is another case of a haunted house story that for me had a really rocky start, where I worried it wouldn't turn it around in the back half. It's a very long read to be left wanting. And as I mentioned in my review of The Possession in Room 904, with these haunted house stories and these classic elements, you do have to read all the way to the end to know whether or not you like these books. A lot of things can happen and be really excellent as long as the payoff is there in the ending. And I am thrilled to tell you We Live Here Now is one of those books you should be reading. The payoff is definitely there. It is richer and deeper and creates more understanding about things I didn't like or was unsure of when I got to the ending. And it's one of those books that I think I really want to reread later so that I can start from the beginning knowing what the end result will be and see if I can trace all the different hints and clues that were dropped on the way to that ending. I really feel like we got 2 separate climaxes out of this book. First, an ending to what was going on in the house and freeing Sally, and then later we get to go through that journey again with Emily with a very different conclusion. So if you are looking for a haunted house story that's a little bit out of the norm, has a unique and special twist, We Live Here Now is probably the book for you. And talk to me in those comments down below. Do you have a haunted house story I should check out next? I'm always looking for the newest and greatest read there. And the secret emoji today is going to be a haunted house. As always, keep reading.